My name is Anne, and I'm about to tell you how my life shattered and rebuilt itself in ways I never imagined possible. This story begins exactly 1 year ago, on my 34th birthday, the day I learned that sometimes the worst moments become the doorway to something better. But standing in my lounge that February evening, watching my world collapse, I couldn't have known that then. I'd finished my shift at Meadowbrook Primary School, where I worked as a teaching assistant, earning barely £19,000 annually. My feet ached, my back was sore, and I'd spent the day wiping paint off 6-year-olds and mediating playground disputes. But it was my birthday, and I'd allowed myself to hope that Marcus might have planned something, anything, to make me feel seen. The moment I opened the front door, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere felt thick, charged with an energy I couldn't name. Marcus sat on our worn sofa, flanked by his 2 closest mates, Danny and Rob. 3 empty beer cans littered the coffee table, and the telly was muted, which never happened. They'd been waiting for me. Right then, Marcus said, standing up. His voice was cold, flat, nothing like the man I'd married 6 years earlier. "Let's get this over with." I stood frozen in the doorway, my bag still on my shoulder, trying to understand what was happening. Marcus reached behind the telly and pulled out a brown envelope. He didn't hand it to me. He tossed it at my feet, where it landed with a soft thud on our threadbare carpet. "Divorce papers," he said simply. "It was lovely whilst it lasted, Annie, but I'm done." The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced off my brain like stones off water. Danny shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. Rob stared at his hands. And Marcus, my husband, the man who'd promised to love me in sickness and health, stood there with his arms crossed, waiting for my reaction like he was watching a football match. "What?" I managed finally. My voice sounded small, childlike. "I've been seeing someone else," he continued, and there was almost boredom in his tone, like he was explaining something obvious to someone slow. "For about 8 months now. Kelsey. Well, she actually takes care of herself, if you know what I mean. Keeps fit, makes an effort." His eyes raked over me then, my teaching assistant uniform of cheap trousers and a sensible jumper, my hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, my face bare of makeup because I'd been too tired that morning to bother. I felt every perceived flaw he was cataloguing, felt the humiliation burn through my chest like acid. Danny sniggered. Actually sniggered. Rob elbowed him, but the damage was done. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab that envelope and throw it back in his face. I wanted to demand how he could do this, today of all days, in front of his mates like I was some kind of entertainment. But my throat had closed up, and my hands were shaking, and all I could do was stand there whilst my marriage ended in our lounge on my 34th birthday. Then my mobile rang. The sound cut through the awful silence like a knife. I pulled it from my pocket with trembling fingers. The screen read, "St. Mary's Hospital." My blood went cold. My mother, Patricia, lived alone and had been complaining about headaches lately, but I'd thought it was just stress, just. "Ms. Anne." The voice was professional, urgent, female. I'd answered without thinking, and somehow, impossibly, I'd put it on loudspeaker. "We've been trying to reach you for the past hour. Your mother's been admitted. She's suffered a severe stroke. It's serious. You need to come immediately." The room went silent. Properly silent. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat, where the world seems to stop spinning for just a moment. Marcus's face had gone pale. Danny and Rob suddenly found the floor fascinating. "I'm on my way," I said, and my voice was steady now, clear. Funny how crisis can do that, burn away everything extraneous and leave only what matters. I turned and walked back towards the door. Behind me, I heard Marcus start to say something, and, wait, I didn't stop. I stepped over the divorce papers lying on the floor like rubbish and walked out of that house, leaving my husband and his mates in their awful, awkward silence. My hands shook as I unlocked my car. My vision blurred with tears I wouldn't let fall, not yet. As I pulled out of our drive, I glanced back once at the house we'd shared, the life I'd thought was mine. I didn't know it then, but I was driving away from more than just Marcus. I was driving towards a version of myself I hadn't met yet, one who would learn that betrayal doesn't destroy you, it reveals what you're made of. But first, I had to get to my mother. First, I had to survive the night. I spent the next 72 hours in a plastic chair beside my mother's hospital bed, watching her chest rise and fall with mechanical precision. The stroke had ravaged the left side of her body, leaving her partially paralyzed, drifting in and out of consciousness whilst machines beeped their monotonous rhythm around us. Patricia had raised me alone after my father walked out when I was 7. She'd worked 2 jobs, sacrificed holidays, worn the same coat for a decade so I could have new school shoes. And now she lay there, 61 years old, fighting for every breath whilst I held her hand and pretended I wasn't falling apart. Between vigils, I tried to handle the practical things. The mortgage payment was due in 3 days. I pulled out my mobile and logged into our joint account, the one Marcus and I had shared for 6 years, where both our salaries were deposited. The screen loaded. I stared at the balance, certain I'd made a mistake. £127.43. I refreshed the page. The number didn't change. Our account, which should have held at least £4,000 between both our monthly salaries, had been emptied. I scrolled frantically through the transaction history. 2 days ago, whilst I'd been at work teaching children their colours, Marcus had transferred £4,300 to an account I didn't recognise. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly dropped the phone. I rang him 17 times. He didn't answer. On the 18th attempt, he finally picked up. What? His voice was irritated, like I was bothering him. Where's our money, Marcus? I kept my voice low, conscious of the other patients and their visiting families around me. Where's the £4,000? I needed to set myself up, didn't I? He said it like it was obvious, like I was being unreasonable. New flat deposit, first month's rent. You'll be fine, Anne. You always are. The mortgage is due in 3 days, I said, and my voice was shaking now despite my efforts to control it. I can't pay it. I can't pay anything. You've left me with nothing. Not my problem anymore, he said. That's what divorce means. He hung up. I sat in that hospital corridor, phone clutched in my hand, and something cracked inside my chest. Not my heart breaking, that had already happened. This was different. This was rage, pure and white-hot, the kind I'd never allowed myself to feel before. A nurse found me there 20 minutes later, tears streaming down my face, trying to breathe through the panic that was crushing my lungs. Her name was Sadia, according to her badge. She was perhaps 40, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that somehow made everything feel slightly less catastrophic. Come on, love, she said gently, guiding me to a quiet alcove near the vending machines. Let's get you sorted. I told her everything. The divorce papers, Marcus's cruelty, the empty account. She listened without judgment, occasionally passing me tissues from the box she'd brought. My ex-husband did similar, Sadia said when I'd finally run out of words. Cleaned out our savings the week before he left. Bought his girlfriend a car with it, if you can believe that. She shook her head. Men like that, they take everything and still play victim. But you know what? 3 years on, I've got my own flat, my own money, my own peace. And he's still a miserable bastard, just with someone else now. I managed a weak laugh despite everything. You'll survive this, Sadia continued, and there was absolute certainty in her voice. I promise you will. It doesn't feel like it now, but you're stronger than you know. On the 4th day, my mother woke properly. Her eyes found mine, and though her left side remained motionless, she squeezed my hand with her right. My brave girl, she whispered, the words slightly slurred but unmistakable. I wanted to tell her I wasn't brave, that I was terrified and broken and had no idea how to survive what was coming. But before I could speak, Dr. Okafor appeared, clipboard in hand, expression professionally sympathetic. Ms. Anne, might we have a word? We stepped into a small consulting room that smelled of antiseptic and despair. Dr. Okafor explained that my mother would need at least 6 months of intensive rehabilitation, possibly longer. Her mobility was severely compromised. She'd require daily care visits if she returned home, or residential support in a facility. The costs, I started, but my throat closed around the words. Social services can help, she said gently. But there will still be substantial expenses. I'm sorry. I walked back to the car park in a daze. Got into my car. Locked the doors. And screamed. Properly screamed, the sound tearing from my throat until it went raw, pounding my fists against the steering wheel until they ached. When the storm finally passed, I sat in the silence, breathing hard, my reflection staring back at me from the rearview mirror. My eyes were red, my face blotchy, my hair a mess. But I was still here. Still breathing. Still standing. Marcus had taken my money, my dignity, my birthday, my security. But he hadn't taken everything. Somewhere inside me, buried beneath the fear and rage and grief, was something he couldn't touch. I wiped my face. Started the engine. I had 3 days to find £1,840 for the mortgage, no savings, and a mother who needed me. Looking back now, I realize that moment in the car park was when I stopped waiting to be rescued and started learning to save myself. I didn't find £1,840 in 3 days. What I found instead was a solicitor who explained, in painfully precise legal language, that recovering the stolen money would take months, possibly years, and cost more in legal fees than I'd ever recover. Unfortunately, it was a joint account, she said, not unkindly. Technically, he had every right to withdraw those funds, regardless of how morally reprehensible his timing was. I walked out of her office feeling like I'd been punched. The mortgage company was less sympathetic. A formal letter arrived on day 7, printed on heavy cream paper that somehow made the threat feel more real: notice of arrears. I had 14 days to pay £1,840 or they would begin repossession proceedings on the house my grandmother had left me, the only security I'd ever known. I found a bedsit the following Tuesday. It was above a fish and chip shop in one of Nottingham's rougher areas, the kind of place where you didn't walk alone after dark. The letting agent, a bored woman with purple acrylic nails, showed me around with barely concealed disdain. "It's £4.95 a month," she said, gesturing vaguely at the single room that served as bedroom, lounge, and kitchen combined. "First month plus deposit up front. Heating's coin-operated, shared bathroom down the hall." The walls were stained yellow from decades of cigarette smoke. The carpet was brown, though I suspected it hadn't started that way. Through the single window, I could see the alley behind the shop, bins overflowing with greasy packaging. The smell of cooking oil permeated everything. "I'll take it," I said. I moved in that Friday with 2 suitcases and a sense of unreality that hadn't lifted since my birthday. Mrs. Kowalski, my elderly Polish neighbor, introduced herself immediately, pressing a plate of still-warm pierogi into my hands. "You look like you need feeding," she said in heavily accented English. "And maybe also friend, yes?" I nearly cried at the simple kindness. But kindness didn't pay solicitors. On day 9, Marcus's legal team sent their formal demand. He wanted half the value of the marital home. The house my grandmother had left me, that I'd owned outright before we married, that Marcus had contributed exactly nothing towards beyond occasionally mowing the lawn when he felt like it. I rang him. The conversation was brief, my voice cold in ways I hadn't known I was capable of. "You want half my grandmother's house? The house you put nothing into? Marriage is a partnership, Anne. I'm entitled." "Fine," I interrupted. "But I'm fighting you for every penny you stole. And I'm telling everyone, Marcus. Your boss, your family, your precious Kelsey. Everyone gets to know exactly what kind of man you are." He laughed. Actually laughed. "No one's going to believe a bitter ex-wife. Try me." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with an anger that felt cleaner somehow than the grief had. That night, Mrs. Kowalski found me crying on the shared bathroom floor at 2 a.m. She said nothing, just sat beside me on the cold tiles, her arthritic hand patting my shoulder whilst I sobbed. "I survived the communists, dear," she said eventually. "Lost everything twice. You know what I learned? Rock bottom is actually quite solid. Good place to build from." I wanted to believe her. The email arrived 3 days later, just as I was beginning to think things couldn't possibly get worse. The mortgage company again, their language polite but unmistakable. I had 14 days to pay the arrears of £1,840, plus the current month's payment of £890, or repossession proceedings would commence immediately. I sat on my stained carpet, surrounded by the smell of yesterday's fried fish, and did the mathematics. My teaching assistant salary was £19,000 annually, roughly £1,240 monthly after tax. Rent here was £495. Food, utilities, travel to see my mother at the rehabilitation centre. The numbers didn't work. They would never work. I could sell the house, I supposed. Give Marcus his blood money and find somewhere cheaper. But that house was my grandmother's legacy, the only thing in my life that had ever felt permanent, and the thought of surrendering it to Marcus's greed made something fierce and stubborn rise in my chest. I pulled out my laptop and started searching. Second jobs, cleaning positions, anything that would fit around my teaching hours. By midnight, I'd applied for 17 positions. By morning, I'd made a decision: Marcus would not take my home. He'd already taken enough. Looking back, I think that was the night I stopped being the woman who'd stood frozen whilst divorce papers hit the floor, and started becoming someone else entirely. Someone who fought back. I got 3 responses to my 17 job applications. 2 were scams, promising enormous wages for minimal work if I'd just provide my bank details first. The third was real: cleaning offices in the city centre, 4 mornings weekly, 5 a.m. to 8 a.m., £520 monthly cash in hand. I started the following Monday. The work was brutal. I'd finish cleaning at 8, rush home to shower and change, then sprint to Meadowbrook Primary for my 9 o'clock start. By lunch, I was running on fumes and meal deal sandwiches from Tesco, the cheapest option at £3.50. By evening, I could barely keep my eyes open. But £520 meant I could stave off repossession for another month. It meant survival, even if that survival felt increasingly like slow drowning. 3 weeks into this punishing routine, Mr. Cromwell, the head teacher, called me into his office. I went reluctantly, certain I was about to be sacked for falling asleep during assembly. Instead, he offered me a lifeline. "And, I've noticed your work with the children during art lessons," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You've got a real gift for connecting with them, especially the vulnerable ones. I'd like you to run an after-school art club. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 to 5:30. We can offer £150 monthly from the pupil premium budget." I nearly wept. Yes. Absolutely yes. The art club started the following week. 8 children, aged 7 to 10, most from difficult home situations. There was Ryan, whose father was in prison. Amora, living in temporary housing. And Lily, a silent girl whose parents were going through what her file delicately termed a high-conflict divorce. Lily never spoke. Not once. She'd arrive, take her materials, and paint with an intensity that seemed far too old for her 8 years. Her work was haunting, beautiful in ways that made my chest ache. One Tuesday, 6 weeks into the club, Lily approached me as the others were packing away. She held out a painting, her hands trembling slightly. It showed a woman standing alone beneath a dark sky, surrounded by shadows. But above her, stars were beginning to appear, small points of light breaking through the darkness. "That's you, Miss And," Lily whispered. Her first words in all the weeks I'd known her. "You're sad now, but the stars are coming. I can see them." I crouched down to her level, not trusting my voice. "It's beautiful, Lily. Thank you." She nodded solemnly and walked away, leaving me holding this unexpected gift, this evidence that even children could see through my carefully maintained facade. That evening, for the first time in months, I painted. Not for the children, not for anyone else, but for myself. I set up in my tiny bedsit, using cheap acrylics and whatever surfaces I could find, and I painted everything I'd been holding inside. The betrayal. The rage. The fear. The exhaustion. It poured out of me in colors and shapes that didn't need words. I was still painting at midnight when I made the mistake of checking Facebook. The photo appeared on my feed like a knife to the chest. Marcus and Kelsey, tanned and laughing on a beach somewhere tropical. Her in a bikini, him with his arm around her waist, both looking insufferably pleased with themselves. The caption read, "When you finally find someone who values you, red heart # blessed life # fresh start." The date stamp showed it had been posted last week. Last week. When Marcus had told his solicitor he was broke and couldn't possibly return any of the money he'd stolen. When I'd been scraping together coins for the electricity meter and eating toast for dinner. When I'd been working myself into the ground at 2 jobs just to keep a roof over my head. My hands shook as I scrolled through the photos. 5-star resort. Cocktails by the pool. Sunset dinners. The holiday had to have cost at least £2,000. My money. My security. My grandmother's legacy that I was fighting to keep. All of it funding Marcus's romantic getaway whilst I lived above a chip shop and survived on 3 hours of sleep. I screenshotted everything. Every photo, every caption, every smug comment from their friends congratulating them. I saved them all to a folder on my laptop, evidence that Marcus was a liar and a thief, that his claims of poverty were as false as his wedding vows had been. I didn't know yet what I'd do with this evidence. But having it felt like power, like for the first time since my birthday, I held something he couldn't take away. Mrs. Kowalski knocked on my door around 1 a.m., probably hearing me moving about. "Can't sleep?" she asked. Something like that. She looked at my laptop screen, at the beach photos still displayed, and her expression hardened. "This is the husband. Ex-husband. Almost. Good. He has face like man who kicks puppies." She squeezed my shoulder. "You keep fighting, Anne. Is only way." After she left, I stared at Lily's painting propped against my wall. A woman in darkness, with stars beginning to appear. I wasn't sure I believed in stars anymore. But I was learning to believe in fighting back. 6 months after my world collapsed, I attended my mother's discharge meeting at the rehabilitation center. Patricia had made remarkable progress, her speech clearer now, her left side stronger though still weak. She'd be moving into a supported living flat with twice daily care visits, which would cost £680 monthly that I could barely afford but refused to let her go without. I sat in the waiting area, exhausted from my morning cleaning shift, trying to calculate impossible numbers in my head. That's when a man carrying 2 coffees collided with me, spilling one entirely down his shirt. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." I jumped up, mortified, grabbing napkins from the nearby dispenser. He laughed, actually laughed, whilst coffee dripped onto his work boots. "Well, that's one way to make sure I'm awake for this meeting." His accent was Scottish, warm and self-deprecating. "I'm James. And clearly a disaster with beverages. Anne. And I'm the disaster, apparently." We talked for 20 minutes whilst he waited for his father's physiotherapy session to finish. Easy conversation, the kind I hadn't had in months. He was a joiner, 38, self-employed, there because his dad had taken a fall off a ladder. He had kind eyes and a gentle manner that made something in my chest, something I'd thought Marcus had killed entirely, flutter weakly back to life. He didn't ask for my number. I appreciated that more than I could say. 2 weeks later, I saw him at Tesco, both of us clearly shopping the reduced section at closing time. This time he did ask, not for a date, but for coffee as mates, because you look like someone who could use a friend. I surprised myself. "Yeah. All right." We met the following Saturday at a cheap cafe near the city centre. Over terrible coffee and surprisingly good cake, I found myself telling him everything. Marcus, the stolen money, the bedsit, my mother, the crushing weight of trying to survive on 2 jobs and still falling short. James listened without interruption, without judgment, his expression growing progressively darker. "My ex-wife did similar," he said finally. "Took our savings, 15,000 quid, and blamed me for her affair. Said I'd driven her to it by working too much." He shook his head. "I thought I'd never trust anyone again after that." "Do you now?" I asked quietly. "Getting there. Slowly." He met my eyes. "Takes time, doesn't it? Learning that one person's cruelty doesn't mean everyone's cruel." Something passed between us then, a recognition that went deeper than words. 2 people who'd been broken by betrayal, trying to figure out how to be whole again. Our friendship developed carefully over the following weeks. Coffee became walks in the park, became comfortable silences that didn't need filling. James told me about his woodworking, showed me photos of beautiful furniture he'd crafted. I told him about the children in my art club, About Lily's painting and Mrs. Kowalski's fierce kindness. One evening, walking along the canal as autumn settled over Nottingham, James said something that stopped me in my tracks. "You know what I admire about you, and you're still kind. After everything that's happened, you're still gentle with those kids, still patient with your mum, still decent. Marcus didn't break that part of you." I felt tears prick my eyes. Most days I feel completely broken. "Breaking and broken aren't the same thing," he said softly. "Breaking is active. It means you're still fighting, still changing, still becoming something else. Broken means you've stopped. And you haven't stopped." We stood there on the towpath whilst joggers passed and ducks settled for the evening, and I realized I'd been wrong about something fundamental. I'd thought surviving meant enduring alone, proving I didn't need anyone. But maybe surviving also meant accepting that some people want to walk beside you, not because you need rescuing, but because walking together is simply better than walking apart. "Thank you," I said finally, "for being kind when I'd forgotten what that looked like." James smiled. "That's what mates are for." But the way he looked at me suggested we both knew we were becoming something more than mates, even if neither of us was quite ready to name it yet. Marcus appeared at my bedsit on a Wednesday evening, unannounced and reeking of alcohol. I opened the door to find him swaying slightly, his eyes red-rimmed, his usual arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. "We need to talk," he slurred. "No, we don't." I started to close the door, but he put his hand against it. "Please, Anne. Just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood in the middle of my tiny room, taking in the stained carpet, the smell of chip fat, the single bed pushed against the wall. I watched him catalogue my reduced circumstances and felt nothing but contempt. "Kelsey left me," he said finally, and then he started crying. Actual tears running down his face as he collapsed onto my only chair. "She met someone else. Someone with money. A finance manager or something. She said I was boring and broke and she deserved better." The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. "I made a terrible mistake, Annie. I never stopped loving you. We can fix this, we can try again, I'll do better, I promise." "Stop." My voice cut through his rambling like a blade. "Just stop talking." He looked up at me, confused, like he'd expected sympathy or maybe even joy at his return. "Do you remember what you said to me, Marcus?" I kept my voice eerily calm, each word precise. "On my birthday, in front of your mates. You said I didn't take care of myself. That I wasn't enough. You threw divorce papers at my feet like I was rubbish you were discarding. I was confused, I didn't mean. And whilst I was at the hospital watching my mother fight for her life, you emptied our account. £4,300. Then you went on a beach holiday with her, posted photos calling it a fresh start, whilst I was living on toast and working 2 jobs just to survive." Marcus's face flushed. "I needed to move on, No." The word came out sharp, final. "You were cruel. Deliberately, publicly cruel. You humiliated me, stole from me, abandoned me when I needed support most. And now she's done to you what you did to me, and you think I'm your backup plan? That's not fair. I loved you. You loved having someone to come home to. Someone safe and convenient who didn't challenge you or expect much. That's not love, Marcus. That's just comfortable." His expression shifted then, the tears drying up, replaced by something uglier. "You'll regret this. You'll end up alone, bitter, exactly what you deserve. No one else is going to want you, Anne. You're not special. You're not even pretty anymore. Get out." The words erupted from me with months of suppressed rage behind them. "Get out of my home, out of my life. You took my money, my security, my dignity. You don't get my future too. You don't get another second of my time or my tears or my concern. You're nothing to me now. Less than nothing. And, you can't just." I said get out. I was screaming now, not caring who heard, not caring about anything except making him leave. "Out. Now." He stumbled to the door, his face twisted with anger, shouting something about the house settlement, about making me pay, about his solicitor. I slammed the door so hard the frame shook. Then I collapsed against it, my whole body shaking, adrenaline coursing through my veins like electricity. Mrs. Kowalski appeared within minutes, as she always did, carrying tea and her eternal wisdom. She sat with me on the floor whilst I trembled, saying nothing, just being present until the storm passed. That weekend, I told my mother everything. Patricia, still working hard on her speech, gripped my hand fiercely. Choosing yourself, she managed slowly, isn't selfish. It's survival. I'm so proud of you. Later, walking to the bus stop, I realized something profound. I'd spent 6 years trying to be enough for Marcus, shrinking myself to fit his expectations, apologizing for taking up space. And in 30 minutes of brutal honesty, I'd finally chosen myself instead. It felt terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Mr. Cromwell caught me in the staff room 3 weeks after the Marcus confrontation, whilst I was marking spelling tests and trying not to fall asleep into my coffee. And, the local council is organizing a community art exhibition next month, celebrating work by underprivileged children and adults. I think your art club should participate. What do you say? I said yes before my brain could catch up with my mouth. The children were thrilled. For 4 weeks, we worked on pieces about resilience, hope, family, and belonging. Ryan painted his mum visiting his dad in prison, the colors bright despite the subject matter. Amora created a collage of all the temporary houses she'd lived in, arranged like stepping stones leading somewhere better. And Lily painted stars, dozens of them, breaking through darkness. I decided to submit my own work too. 6 paintings I'd created in my bedsit over the past months, documenting my journey from betrayal to survival. Raw, unflinching pieces that exposed everything I'd felt but couldn't say. Part of me was terrified. The rest of me knew I needed to do this, needed to reclaim my narrative. James helped me build frames in his workshop, refusing payment. This is what mates do, he insisted, though the way he looked at me suggested we'd moved beyond mate somewhere along the way. The night before the opening, I had a full panic attack. Sitting on my bedsit floor at 11 p.m., hyperventilating into my hands, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. What if people judged me? What if the work was amateur rubbish? What if Marcus showed up? James arrived 20 minutes later, alerted by Mrs. Kowalski who'd heard me through the walls. He sat beside me, made terrible tea, and talked me down with gentle patience. Your story matters, Anne. Your pain matters. And your strength, God, your strength is extraordinary. Let people see it. Let them know they're not alone in their struggles. The exhibition opened on Saturday at the community center. I arrived early, my stomach churning, watching volunteers hang the work. My paintings looked different on proper walls, more real somehow, more permanent. Over 200 people came. Families, teachers, local councillors, journalists. People stood in front of my collection, silent, some crying. A woman approached me mid-afternoon, trembling. I'm going through a divorce, she whispered. My husband emptied our account last week. Your paintings, they made me feel less alone. Like maybe I'll survive this too. I hugged her whilst she cried, this stranger who understood my pain in ways my friends never had. Then Miriam appeared, a gallery owner from Derby, elegant and sharp-eyed. I want to offer you a solo exhibition in 3 months. And I run art therapy workshops at the community centre. Would you consider teaching? £28 hourly, flexible schedule. I could barely process the words. But before I could respond, chaos erupted at the entrance. Marcus, clearly drunk, stumbling through the doors and shouting across the crowded room. That's my wife. She's painting lies about me. This is slander. The room fell silent. Every head turned. Security started moving towards him, but I stepped forward, my voice steady and surprisingly loud. I'm not your wife, Marcus. And these aren't lies, they're my truth. My experience. My pain that you caused. Now leave before you embarrass yourself further. He looked around at hundreds of judging eyes, at Lily clutching her mum's hand, at Mr. Cromwell's disgusted expression, at the journalists with their phones out recording everything. You'll regret this, he spat, but his voice wavered. The only thing I regret, I said clearly, is not seeing who you were sooner. Now get out." Security escorted him out whilst he shouted threats about solicitors and defamation. The moment the doors closed behind him, the room erupted in supportive applause. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, but I was smiling. Actually smiling. Because for the first time since my birthday, I'd faced Marcus and won. Not through revenge or cruelty, but through truth and dignity. Lily appeared beside me, slipping her small hand into mine. "The stars came, Miss Anne. Just like I painted." I looked around the room. At my mother in her wheelchair, beaming with pride. At James watching from the corner with unmistakable warmth in his eyes. At my work on the walls, my pain transformed into something that helped others. Maybe Lily was right. Maybe the stars had come after all. The exhibition's success changed everything in ways I hadn't anticipated. The local newspaper ran a feature titled "From Betrayal to Beauty, Artist's Journey of Resilience." Within days, Miriam's offer became real, contracts and dates and possibilities I'd stopped believing existed. I accepted everything. The solo exhibition in 3 months. The art therapy teaching position at £28 hourly. Combined with my school job, I'd be earning roughly £32,000 annually. Enough to keep my mother's care, save my grandmother's house, rebuild a life that felt like mine. The school offered me a permanent full-time teaching assistant role with a raise to £21,500. I was no longer drowning. For the first time in 8 months, I could breathe. I gave notice on the bedsit and the cleaning job. Mrs. Kowalski cried when I told her, though she insisted it was just her allergies. "You go be magnificent," she said, squeezing my hands with surprising strength. "But you visit, yes? Old ladies get lonely." "Every week," I promised. With pierogi. Moving back into my grandmother's house felt surreal. I walked through rooms I'd thought I'd lose, touching familiar walls, breathing air that didn't smell of chip fat. The mortgage arrears were cleared using money I'd scraped together from both jobs. Marcus's solicitor had finally agreed to drop his claim on the property after mine threatened fraud charges over the emptied account. The house was mine again. Truly, legally mine. One Wednesday evening, James arrived with fish and chips from the shop near my old bedsit. We ate on my grandmother's worn sofa, now decorated with cushions I'd made from fabric remnants, surrounded by my paintings that finally had proper space. We were laughing about something silly when the laughter faded into comfortable silence. James set down his food and turned to face me properly, his expression suddenly serious. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "And you can say no, and we'll still be mates, I promise. But Anne, I think you're extraordinary." My heart started hammering. "Watching you rebuild yourself these past months," he continued, "watching you refuse to let that bastard break you, watching you turn pain into art that helps others. You're the strongest person I know. And somewhere along the way, I fell for you. Completely. I felt tears gathering. James, I'm terrified. Of trusting again. Of being someone's second choice again. You'd never be second choice." His voice was fierce now. "You'd be the only choice. But only when you're ready. No pressure, no expectations. I just needed you to know." I kissed him. Leaned forward and pressed my lips to his before fear could stop me. It was tender, careful, tasting of salt and vinegar and possibility. We pulled back, foreheads touching, both breathing hard. "I can't promise I won't be broken sometimes," I whispered. "I can't promise I won't have bad days, or panic, or doubt everything. I'm not asking for perfect," James said softly. "I'm asking for honest. For real. For you, exactly as you are, broken bits and all." We spent the evening talking, holding each other, taking everything slowly. Building something on a foundation of friendship rather than desperation or need. He told me about his fears too, about how his ex-wife's betrayal had made him doubt his own judgment, made him wonder if he'd ever trust his heart again. "But with you," he said, "it feels different. Like maybe we're both safe enough to try." Around midnight, we made tea and sat in my grandmother's kitchen whilst rain pattered against the windows. James traced patterns on my hand, and I let myself imagine a future that didn't involve just surviving, but actually living. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I thought about Lily's painting, still hanging in my bedroom. A woman in darkness with stars appearing above. I thought about the past 8 months, the betrayal and loss and grinding poverty, the moments I'd wanted to give up but hadn't. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that maybe the worst thing that ever happened to me led me exactly where I needed to be. James smiled. The stars came. Yeah, I agreed, looking at this kind man who'd walked beside me without trying to carry me. The stars came. We fell asleep on the sofa, wrapped around each other, two people who'd been broken learning that broken things can still fit together beautifully. Today is my 35th birthday, and everything is different. I woke this morning in my grandmother's house, sunlight streaming through windows I'd once thought I'd lose, in a bed that's mine, in a life I rebuilt from absolute rubble. The mortgage is paid. The rooms smell of coffee and paint and possibility, not chip fat and despair. James had left early for a job but left a note on my pillow, "Happy birthday to the woman who taught me that broken things can become beautiful." Tonight, we celebrate properly. Beside it, a small wrapped package containing a painting he'd made, stars emerging from darkness in colors that somehow captured exactly how the past year had felt. My mother arrived at 9, walking with a cane now, her speech almost completely recovered. She'd brought a homemade birthday cake, slightly lopsided but perfect, and we ate slices in the kitchen whilst she told me about her new friend at the supported living complex, a retired teacher who shared her love of terrible detective novels. "I'm proud of you, sweetheart," she said, squeezing my hand. "Not just for surviving, but for how you survived. With grace and dignity and without becoming bitter." I was bitter, I admitted. 4 months. "Being bitter and becoming bitter are different things," she said wisely. "You felt it, processed it, then let it go. That's strength, not weakness." My solo exhibition opened tonight at Miriam's Gallery in Derby. 50 pieces documenting the entire journey from betrayal through survival to rebirth. The art therapy classes I'd been teaching had 12 regular students now, people finding healing through creativity the way I had. Some weeks I earned more from teaching than from my school job, though I'd kept both because I couldn't imagine life without those children. Lily, now 9, arrived at 3 with her parents, together and healing, to help me prepare. She'd made me a card with stars on the front and written inside in careful handwriting, "Thank you for showing me what brave looks like." The gallery was packed by 7. Standing room only, people spilling onto the pavement outside. My mother sat in a special chair James had built, Mrs. Kowalski beside her wearing her finest dress. Mr. Cromwell brought half the school staff. Sadia, the nurse who'd sat with me in that hospital corridor a lifetime ago, came with her teenage daughter. The local paper's photographer circulated, capturing reactions to paintings that showed everything I'd been too afraid to say out loud. A woman approached me, crying, explaining that she was 3 months into her own divorce and my work made her believe she'd survive it. "You will," I told her with absolute certainty. "It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but you will." Marcus had sent a Facebook message this morning, his 3rd attempt at contact in recent months. A vague apology, a suggestion we talk things through properly. I'd deleted it without reading past the first line. Some doors, once closed, should remain that way. He was someone else's problem now, or more likely, his own. Around 9, my phone rang with an unknown London number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me step into the quiet corridor and pick up. "Hello, this is Catherine from Arts Council England. We saw the newspaper coverage of your exhibition and your art therapy program. We'd like to discuss a grant opportunity for expanding community mental health services through creative arts. Would you be available to meet next week?" I stood there, phone pressed to my ear, unable to quite believe what I was hearing. A year ago, I'd been living above a chip shop, surviving on toast, cleaning offices at 5 a.m. just to keep myself from drowning. And now someone from Arts Council England wanted to fund my work. Yes, I managed. Absolutely yes. James found me in the corridor afterwards, grinning at my shell-shocked expression. "Good news. I think my life just changed again." "It does that around you," he said, pulling me close. "You're extraordinary. When are you going to start believing that?" We stepped outside into the cool February evening, his arm around my shoulders. Above us, Real stars were visible despite the city lights, small points of brightness in the vast darkness. I thought about the woman I'd been a year ago, standing in my lounge whilst divorce papers hit the floor, certain she'd never be whole again. I thought about Bedzits and empty accounts and Marcus's cruelty, about my mother's stroke and impossible debts and moments I'd wanted to simply give up. But I hadn't given up. I'd fought. I'd survived. I'd transformed pain into art and art into healing, not just for myself but for others. The story doesn't end with perfection. I still have hard days, moments when the trauma resurfaces unexpectedly. But it ends with me, standing in light I created myself, surrounded by people I chose and who chose me back, knowing my worth in ways I never had before. Marcus didn't break me. He revealed my strength. And that, I've learned, makes all the difference.